The West Midlands region houses 13% of the UK's asylum seekers. It's a quota that was set when New Labour decided to disperse asylum seekers around the country 20 years ago. Tonight, Newsnight can reveal the extent to which many of them are clustered in a handful of local areas here, often in some of Britain's most deprived postcodes. In all, there are 24 wards in the West Midlands region where the number of asylum seekers make up more than 1 in 200 of the population. The official figures show Stoke-on-Trent is accommodating 886 asylum seekers. With a population of nearly 250,000, that's a ratio of 1 in 281 people, comfortably above the official 1 in 200 limit. But the figures passed to Newsnight show Stoke-on-Trent has 7 wards where asylum seekers make up more than 1 in 100 of the population. In the Etruria and Hanley ward, they make up 1 in 36. In Burslem Central, they make up 1 in 43, and in Lightwood North and Normacott, they make up 1 in 61 people. Local authorities do have some opportunity to object every time one of the private firms running the asylum contracts finds a new property. But it's becoming increasingly clear that some of the poorest parts of our poorest towns and cities are taking the highest numbers. Meanwhile, many councils refuse to take any at all. In the West Midlands region, just 7 out of 35 councils currently house asylum seekers. The 7 are all urban. Stoke is joined by Birmingham, Coventry, Dudley, Sandwell, Walsall and Wolverhampton. Herefordshire is very different to those places, but it too has said it will house asylum seekers, except it doesn't. It appears so far no suitable accommodation has been found. Housing here is more expensive than in the likes of Stoke. Last month, the government announced it signed new UK-wide asylum contracts with 3 private firms worth £4 billion over the next decade, substantially more than the scheme has cost previously. Newsnight understands the higher price tag comes with an expectation that the contractors will source asylum seeker accommodation more widely beyond the cheapest areas.
Katie Razzall, well, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, has been calling for the asylum dispersal scheme to be reformed for some time. He joins me now from his home in Lee. Good evening, Andy Burnham. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. What do you make of the figures that Katie Razzall has obtained for tonight on top of last night's figures?
Well, they don't surprise me. That's the reality on the ground in some of the more deprived parts of the country. I want to make one thing really clear, Kirsty. Here in Greater Manchester, we would never play politics with this issue. We've always played a part in terms of welcoming people in the past. We stand ready to do so going forward. We want a system that is humane for people coming here, but also fair to the communities welcoming them. The trouble is, it's neither of those things at the moment. The current system, the cut price system we have, works well for the government and the private contractors who are in that system, but practically for nobody else, and that's got to change.
Well, if it works well for nobody else, you in the past, last year, have said that you would actually threaten to stop taking asylum seekers in Greater Manchester until the situation was reformed. Does that threat still stand?
If necessary, but we have had some movement from the government. So the government has said that it will seek to work with us to bring down the number of people sent here so that we're more in line with our population share.
So
we
what
welcome
is your, sorry to interrupt, but just for clarification, what ratios have you got? Sorry, just for clarification, you know, we've heard tonight there's ratios of 1 in 35, last night 1 in 68. In your view, is it about the ratio or is it about the facility of services and the multiple deprivation all around?
Well, it's both. I mean, the ratio varies across Greater Manchester, Kirsty, but we have taken around a quarter of all asylum seekers here in Greater Manchester. And we've been saying to the government for some time that that's not a sustainable situation, and we need help to bring down the overall numbers. Now, that means councils who've not previously taken people being asked to welcome people into their areas, and we think that is right and proper and fair. And the question comes out, you know, are we one nation here or are we not? You know, we're ready to play our part, and we look to other areas to do the same, and that seems to be fair. And if they won't, we would also then call on ministers to mandate that happens, because otherwise we're going to be in a situation here where the system is completely out of kilter.
So let's be quite clear. At the moment, there's a postcode check local authorities can refuse. What you're saying is you're calling for a change, that it will be absolutely there's no way out of this for local authorities. Every local authority has got to come forward and say they will take asylum seekers. That's what you're asking the government to do.
Well, I think that would be the fairest way, because at the moment the situation isn't fair to areas like ours who are prepared to welcome people, and we do. But we can rightly expect other places to do the same. So, councils have been asked before and many haven't come forward. And we're saying to the government they should act on that. But they've also got to do something about the funding, Kirsty. As I said at the beginning, we want a humane system. Yeah. And we had a report from the Chief Inspector last year that said that I think only a quarter of the accommodation found for asylum seekers was in a decent state.
So
Three-quarters was very poor, rat-infested, damp. That is completely unacceptable.
So if that's all that local authorities have in their area, they shouldn't take asylum seekers then, because you're putting them into areas where there's such deprivation, their lives will be made miserable.
Well, also, they've been put in properties that are unsafe, and that was the finding of the Chief Inspector. As I said, this doesn't work, does it, for those people? It doesn't work for those communities where landlords are failing to maintain those properties. So, how is the government allowing this situation to continue? We need wholesale change here. We need proper funding in the system so that people don't just have a decent home to live in. There's also support for learning English as a second language, support to integrate into the wider community. All of this has been taken away in the cut price system we have.
And is it any surprise to you that some of the areas which have taken a higher proportion of asylum seekers with multiple deprivation in the area are the ones that voted Brexit? The ones that voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union because they were so concerned about immigration?
Well, for me, it goes far deeper than this issue, isn't it? These are the areas that Whitehall has traditionally taken for granted. They failed to give them the investment that they deserve, and then they ask them to absorb all kinds of other issues that they don't fund properly. I mean, that's always been the story, hasn't it? I raised today an issue where we're still waiting to be paid by the government for the cost of the Moorland fires last year, where we brought in the fire brigades and the army to help us with that situation. It's the kind of same old story, isn't it? Some areas are treated better than others. And I think that's why this speaks to the real unfairness that many communities feel. And coming out of the whole Brexit debate, however that ends up, surely we have to get back to running this as one country, where areas get fair investment and they're treated equally as other parts of the country. And I left Westminster because I was fed up working within that system trying to make that case.
But you now have a situation.
I'm trying to now do
you
it
can
from
deal
the
with
outside.
Greater Manchester. You can deal with Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. And if you think there are areas in Greater Manchester which are not fit and do not have the services and do not have the facilities to take asylum seekers, surely you should not be even considering asylum seekers going in these areas. You must say no to those areas as you are within your right.
Well, I'm taking a more reasonable approach, which is in keeping with the way we think here, which is that we are prepared to continue to play our part, because if we live in one nation, then everywhere should play their part, and we step forward and we're always prepared to accept our responsibility. What I'm saying, Kirsty, is bring the number down to a number that is fair given the size of Greater Manchester. Don't take us for granted, and actually fund it properly. I've been doing a lot of work on rough sleeping and homelessness recently, and there are people left without any recourse to public funds that then present themselves to councils seeking support. But the Home Office says that you can't give them any support. That, again, is a completely unfair situation. It puts pressure on our homelessness services here in Greater Manchester. I'm saying to the government, fund that as well. You can't take areas like this for granted anymore. We won't accept it. I won't accept it. They're going to hear more and more from me if these kind of practices in Whitehall continue. They can't take the north of England, the Midlands and other places for granted anymore. There's going to have to be real change in this country coming out of this Brexit debate.
Andy Burnham, thank you very much indeed. And we did ask someone from the government to come on to discuss the issue of asylum dispersal, but nobody was available.